Summary. Some memories arrive softly, in the quiet of a late evening, and somehow stay with us for years. This is the story of the night a simple whisper changed how I understood myself, my past, and the people I thought I knew. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I still remember the way the porch light flickered that evening, throwing worn shadows across Margaret's driveway. I had arrived at her house feeling heavier than usual, carrying the kind of quiet loneliness that comes from working long hours and living alone for too many years. I was 47 then, and though I wouldn't admit it out loud, I was starting to feel a sort of distance growing between the world and me, like I was observing life instead of living it. Margaret had invited me for a small dinner, something simple and comforting. She said her son, Daniel, who had recently moved back to town, would be joining us. I hadn't seen him in nearly 15 years. Back then, he was a lanky college kid. Now he was a full-grown man in his early 30s, taller than I remembered, with an easy calm in the way he carried himself. The evening started normally enough. The three of us sat around the table, talking about the usual things: work, the neighborhood, the endless slowdowns on the highway. But every so often, I caught Daniel watching me with a kind of thoughtful curiosity, not intrusive, just noticing. It unsettled me at first, not in a negative way, just in the sense that I wasn't used to being seen that attentively by anyone. Later, after Margaret went to bed, I stepped outside onto the back porch to breathe in the cool night air. The crickets were steady, almost rhythmic, and the stars were scattered across the sky in a way that made everything feel wide open. I was lost in my thoughts when the screen door squeaked softly behind me. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel asked. "Not at all," I said, surprised by how relieved I felt to have company. He leaned against the railing beside me. For a moment, we didn't speak. There was only the night around us, still and gentle. Then he said something that caught me off guard. Not inappropriate, not forward, just quietly sincere. "You always seemed so strong when I was younger," he said, like someone who carried more in her heart than she ever let people see. I didn't know what to say. It had been years since anyone had spoken to me with that kind of openness. I felt something shift inside me, not a romantic feeling, not anything reckless or out of place. It was more like someone had opened a small window and let fresh air in. I turned toward him. "That's a thoughtful thing to notice." He shrugged lightly. "I guess I always looked up to you more than you realized." There was a gentle warmth in his voice, a kind of respect that felt grounding. Not a single word crossed any boundary, and yet the moment felt meaningful in a way I wasn't prepared for. The porch light hummed above us, the only witness to the quiet exchange. We stood there for a while, talking about the years that had passed, about the goals we chased, the disappointments we faced, and the things we wished we had done differently. His honesty made me reflect on my own journey, the parts I had quietly tucked away, the dreams I had allowed to settle under layers of routine. When the breeze picked up, he leaned a little closer, not touching, not overstepping, just enough to speak softly without raising his voice. "I hope you know," he whispered, "you've made more of a difference in people's lives than you think." Something about those words settled deep inside me, like they filled a space I didn't even know had been empty. And that moment, gentle and respectful as it was, became one I would carry with me for years. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, the soft memory of Daniel's words lingering in my thoughts like a gentle echo. I hadn't expected the night to stay with me so strongly, yet there it was, nudging the edges of my mind as I drove home. It wasn't his tone or the quiet way he had spoken, though that had left an impression. It was the honesty of it. A simple truth offered with no expectation in return. For the next few days, life returned to its predictable rhythm. Work, errands, evenings spent in the quiet of my living room. But every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about that conversation on Margaret's porch, wondering why it had struck me so deeply. Maybe it was because I hadn't felt genuinely seen in a long time. Or maybe it was because Daniel, without meaning to, had held up a mirror and reminded me of a version of myself I thought I had lost along the way. Later that week, Margaret called and invited me to join her at a local charity event. She mentioned that Daniel would be volunteering there as well, helping set up booths and manage the crowd. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was going because Margaret wanted company. But I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a small flutter of anticipation. The event was held at the community center, one of those places that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, with faded posters from long-past celebrations still pinned to the walls. I arrived early to help, and before I even saw him, I heard his voice, steady, warm, unmistakable. When I turned, he was carrying a stack of folding chairs, smiling when he spotted me. "Hey, look who's here," he said, walking over. "Glad you came." There was nothing unusual in his greeting, yet something about the way he said it felt personal, as though he genuinely meant it. Margaret soon joined us, bustling around with her usual cheerful energy. For a while, the three of us worked side by side, setting up tables, arranging decorations, doing the little things that bring order to an event. But every now and then, Daniel and I would exchange a quick glance or a small smile. Not flirtatious, not suggestive, just two people sharing a quiet understanding. At one point, while carrying boxes to the storage room, he paused beside me. "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other night," he said. "I hope I didn't overstep." "You didn't," I said quickly, surprised by how certain I felt. "It was kind, and it meant more than you realize." He nodded, looking relieved. "Good. I just felt like it needed to be said." The storage room was dim, lit only by a narrow window, dust floating in the slanting afternoon light. The moment felt still, almost suspended. There was no tension, no lingering expectation, just an atmosphere of sincerity that made the air feel softer somehow. Later, as the event grew crowded, I watched Daniel interact with people. Neighbors, seniors, kids, always patient, always attentive. He had a way of listening that made others relax, a quiet confidence that wasn't showy or forced. I found myself admiring him not for anything he had said to me, but for who he was. Near the end of the evening, as volunteers began cleaning up, he approached again. "You look thoughtful," he said. "Just taking things in," I replied. "It's been a long time since I felt this. Connected. To a place, to people." He nodded as though he understood exactly what I meant. Sometimes it just takes one moment to remind us we're still part of the world. His words settled gently around us, much like that whisper days earlier. I sensed something beginning to unfold, not a romance, not an impulse, but a quiet journey of understanding between two people who had crossed paths at the right moment in their lives. As I drove home that night, the sky was dark except for a thin line of moonlight stretching across the horizon. And in that peaceful quiet, I realized that the conversation on the porch wasn't an isolated moment. It was the beginning of something steady and meaningful, something that, even then, I knew would continue to grow. Over the next few weeks, life seemed to settle into a new and gentle rhythm, one I hadn't expected at my age. Margaret and I still spoke often, but it was Daniel who quietly slipped into the spaces of my routine, not in a forceful way, not even intentionally. It was more like a soft presence, appearing at the edges of my days, reminding me that connection didn't have to be complicated to matter. Sometimes he would call his mother while I was visiting and end up talking with me for a few minutes. Other times he'd stop by with something small, fresh vegetables from the weekend market, a book he thought I might enjoy, or a story from work he wanted to share. None of it felt out of place. Everything was simple, comfortable, and steady. One afternoon, Margaret invited me over to help her organize old boxes she had stored in the attic. She said it was long overdue, and she needed someone who wouldn't let her get distracted by every keepsake she rediscovered. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, helping her move furniture so we could reach the storage closet. The attic smelled of cedar and old paper, and the sunlight filtered through the high windows in thick, dusty beams. We opened boxes filled with family photos, school projects, and forgotten holiday decorations. Margaret kept drifting into stories that made both of us laugh, and Daniel kept giving me these small, knowing looks whenever his mother wandered off topic. After a while, Margaret excused herself to rest downstairs, leaving Daniel and me alone in the worn quiet of the attic. The moment was peaceful, not charged or uncomfortable. Just two adults sharing a task in a space that held years of memories. He opened an old cardboard box and lifted a framed photo from inside. It was a picture of the three of us from a neighborhood barbecue decades ago. Margaret younger, me with short hair and a wide smile, and Daniel, barely 20, grinning awkwardly at the camera. "You looked happy that day," he said softly, handing me the frame. "I was," I said. Life felt, open back then, like anything could still happen. He sat beside me on the wooden floor. "Does it ever feel like that now?" I hesitated, surprised by the sincerity of the question. "Sometimes," I admitted, "when the days are calm, when I'm around people who make the world feel a little less heavy." He nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "I hope you know you still have that light in you. It's not gone." His tone wasn't dramatic or intense. It was warm, steady, and deeply respectful. A reassurance offered without expectation. It touched something inside me, something quiet but long neglected. We continued sorting through the boxes, occasionally stumbling across small artifacts from the past, a concert ticket, an old postcard I had once sent them, a homemade Christmas ornament Daniel had crafted as a child. Each item carried its own little story, pieces of time scattered across the floor like a college of the years we had lived beside each other without realizing how our paths would one day reconnect. At one point, Daniel brushed dust from his hands and leaned against one of the rafters. "You know," he said, "I always liked when you visited our house back then. You brought this calm energy with you, like you noticed things most adults overlooked." I smiled, touched more deeply than I expected. "I always felt welcome here. Your mother has that gift." He shook his head lightly. "So do you." There was no pause that suggested anything unspoken, no shift in tone, just honesty offered with the same gentle respect he had shown since the night on the porch. That was what made the moment so meaningful. It wasn't in what he said, but in the intention behind it. We finished the attic work just before sunset. As we carried the final box downstairs, Margaret greeted us with iced tea and a relieved smile, grateful the task she had postponed for years was finally done. Later, as I prepared to leave, Daniel walked me to my car. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft oranges and blues. "Thank you for helping today," he said. "I enjoyed it," I replied, "more than I expected." He looked at me with that same thoughtful calm I had come to recognize. "I'm glad." There was nothing more to add, not then. The moment didn't need anything else. It simply rested between us, gentle and meaningful, a small step forward in whatever quiet path we were beginning to walk together. As autumn settled over the town, the days grew cooler and the evenings stretched longer, carrying that familiar quiet that seems to invite reflection. I found myself thinking often about the past few months, about how naturally Daniel had drifted into the gentle corners of my life, bringing with him a calm steadiness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Nothing between us had crossed boundaries, and yet the connection we shared had grown into something deeply meaningful, something built on sincerity rather than grand gestures. One evening, Margaret invited me over for a simple dinner. She had made her warm vegetable stew, the kind she'd served every fall for as long as I could remember. The house smelled like bay leaves and roasted peppers, and for a moment I was transported back to years earlier, when I used to stop by after work just to enjoy her company. Daniel arrived a little later, brushing cold air off his jacket as he stepped inside. He greeted both of us warmly, and the three of us settled around the table like a small, familiar family. The conversation drifted easily. Stories from Margaret's youth, updates from my job, and Daniel's plans to start teaching weekend workshops at the community center. But beneath the warm chatter, I sensed something different in him. Not nervousness, not hesitation, just a quiet intention, the kind that rests beneath someone's words even when they haven't spoken it yet. After dinner, Margaret insisted on washing the dishes alone, shooing us toward the living room like she always did. Daniel and I sat on the sofa, the soft glow of a table lamp flickering across the family photos that lined the wall. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, scattering leaves across the porch. He exhaled slowly, as though gathering his thoughts. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about," he said. My heart tightened a little, not out of fear, but from the gentle weight of the moment. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, "about how these past months have felt. About the conversations we've had, the time we've spent together, and the way you've helped me see things more clearly." His voice was calm, steady, respectful. I stayed silent, letting him speak. "I don't want to cross any lines," he said, "and I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But I wanted you to know that the way I see you, it comes from a place of admiration, a place of gratitude." I felt my breath catch, not from surprise, but from the honesty in his tone. He wasn't confessing anything reckless, nothing that overstepped. Instead, he was offering a truth shaped by thoughtfulness and maturity. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said quietly. "Truly. It means more than you know." He nodded, looking relieved. "Good. I didn't want the chance to pass without saying it." There was a stillness between us then, not awkward or heavy, just full, like the moment itself understood its own importance. I realized that all these months, what had grown between us wasn't something dramatic or rushed. It was a gradual unfolding, a deepening respect, a recognition of shared understanding. I placed my hand gently over his, not as an invitation, but as a heartfelt acknowledgement of everything he had expressed. "You've reminded me," I said softly, "that life doesn't stop offering connection just because we get older. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment and the right person." He smiled, warm, genuine, and squeezed my hand lightly before letting go, honoring every boundary without needing to be told. When I left that night, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of wood smoke. Daniel walked me to my car the way he'd always did, but this time there was a deeper calm between us, as though something unspoken had finally settled into place. Before I opened the door, he said, "I hope we keep sharing moments like this, whatever form they take." "We will," I replied. "I'm certain of it." As I drove home, the headlights stretched across the quiet road, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Not the exhilaration of something new, but the steady warmth of something true. A connection built not on expectation, but on mutual respect, emotional honesty, and the gentle discovery of what it means to be seen again. That night, I realized that the whisper on the porch all those months ago had not been a beginning of something uncertain. It had been the beginning of growth. A reminder that even unexpected moments can carry us forward, helping us rediscover parts of ourselves we thought were long forgotten. And that is why his words, spoken softly under a flickering porch light, still stay in my heart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give us like and subscribe this channel.